Hello, Watem here and welcome back to some more Umineko When They Cry. Let's continue.
そんな姿を息子のジョージ様にきっと見せたくないのでしょう。
Right, we got that far, but for some reason the save only kept it at the start of that section. Oh well. As Shannon hung her head, she thought back on a scene familiar to those who worked in the mansion. Oh. Even Kraus, who acted haughtily towards his siblings, was still treated like a child by Kinzo. Shannon herself had often seen Kinzo slap Kraus and tell him to sit up straight. It was probably very embarrassing to be coerced like that at his age. Taking care to avoid being present at times like that was one of the important responsibilities held by servants working here. However, the fact that Shannon had ended up witnessing such a scene meant that she'd messed up at least once in the past.
そうだろうね。それを察して姿を消すのも子供の務めかな。それにしても今年もこの庭園の花は本当に素敵だね。
George stretched as he said that, and he smoothly changed the subject away from one that was a little gloomy. This time Shannon noticed it too. This person, George, could sensitively figure out the situation and always change the subject to something harmonious out of kindness. It was so smooth that Shannon hadn't noticed it until today. Today, Shannon really had to admire the way George did that. Of the boys close to Shannon's age that she'd known, nearly all had been classmates during her period of mandatory education. But they had all been young, and none had possessed the composure George had. Mere moments ago he'd been just another guest, but right now she couldn't help but think of him as something more. However, such thoughts were mere distractions from her work as a servant. Shannon tried to chase them away with a small shake of her head.
どうしたんだよ。いえ、何でもありません。お茶のご用意をしましょうか。先ほどのアールグレイを改めてご用意します。
紅茶の名前覚えてくれたんだね。嬉しいよ。
さっきはお気遣いをありがとうございました。
Shannon was finally able to put her gratitude into words. If you wrote it out, it wouldn't be very long, but Shannon had needed a little spark of courage to say it out loud. But George played dumb.
何のことだい？お礼を言われるような覚えはないけど。
He seemed to be playing the gentleman in his own way, letting her know he wasn't doing it out of desire for gratitude. George's response seemed to be more or less exactly what Jessica had predicted. She couldn't help but burst out laughing.
なあ、こういうところ気ざったらしいだろ。いえ、そんなことは。
Jessica poked fun at Shannon as the latter remained silent, red-faced. George didn't know the details, but he naturally joined in, laughing the same way. The three of them lazily walked around the garden, catching up on recent events. George, as the oldest cousin, talked about his life experiences. Jessica talked about recent life on Rokkanjima, and Shannon talked about her recent work. They kept going on about these trivial things. Even when Shannon heard the others talk about deeply interesting things, she never felt any particular interest in the actual contents of their stories. She was nothing more than a servant, and she had no intention of delving into her master's lives. She simply wanted them to enjoy their time speaking with her, and would only pretend to listen intently and nod at the right moments. But for some reason, things George talked about today seemed to catch her interest powerfully. Even things she'd normally ignore felt like they contained a trace of kindness behind the words. For some reason, she wanted to know more things about George, no matter how trivial. So, she stared fixedly at him. She thought that, as far as looks went, this visionary of George was probably about average and didn't stick out in any particular way. But he was diligent, serious, and had a deep prudence which allowed him to understand people's hearts and show concern. But she'd never noticed these things before now. She may not have met him many times, but she'd known his face for many years. Even so, she hadn't noticed this once until now. Shannon, embarrassed by her own obliviousness, blushed. George, perhaps thinking that Shannon would listen intently to his stories, kept talking happily and at length about things he'd done and seen. So I'm wondering, we've seen Shannon fall in love with him now, I think everyone can agree. I'm wondering when it was the case for George, if he already likes her. Possibly. But Jessica didn't miss that slight change in Shannon. So she decided she'd change the conversation to the topic she was sure Shannon was most interested in. Oh?
そういやさ、
Got a girlfriend?
ジョージ兄さん、いい加減に彼女とかはできたわけ？
なんだい、やぶから棒に。
Normally, that reaction should have been answer enough. But for some reason, as she was now, Shannon wouldn't be able to understand it unless he said it clearly.
その、ジョージ様はお優しいですから、さぞや、表になるだろうと。
Why do I feel like that's putting the nail in the coffin even further?
いや、
よせよ、シャノン。そういう追い詰め方は、かえって意地悪だぜ。私は別に意地悪。
嬉しい勘違いをありがとう。残念だけど、特定の一人の女性とはまだご縁がないよ。見ての通り、容姿も並以下だからね。女の子を楽しくさせてあげられるような気の利いた話術もないし。
そんなことないと思います。それに、男性の魅力は、容姿では測れないところで決まるんじゃないかと思います。だからジョージ様はとても魅力的な男性じゃないかと、思います。
Shannon was being uncharacteristically verbose. She hardly ever spoke at such length. George seemed fairly pleased to hear someone applaud his charm like this, but he was just a little surprised at this sudden high praise. Jessica, now sure that her guess was spot on, appeared to be barely holding back laughter.
ありがとう、シャノンちゃん。僕に魅力を感じてくれるような寛大な女性に早く巡り合いたいね。
きっと巡り会えると思います。ジョージ様の本当の魅力に気づいている女性は、きっと大勢いらっしゃると思いますよ。
She probably wanted to say there was at least one girl very close to him. Shannon avoided saying that much, drawing a final line as a servant.
そうかな。さすがに照れるね。
He'd probably never been praised this heavily by a girl before. George's face turned just as bright red as Shannon's. As she watched the two of them, Jessica giggled sadistically.
ジョージ兄さんもやがては素敵なパートナーと出会うだろうけどさ、今のままじゃきっと上手にパートナーをエスコートできないと思うぜ。勤勉でいらっしゃるようだけど、そっちのお勉強はからっきしみたいだしよ。
悪かったね。
Okay, here is my bet on what's going to happen. She's going to say, why don't you get some practice with Shannon? I am about 95% sure that's what's going to happen.
その勉強はこれから少しずつしていくよ。
相手もいないのにどうやって？
It's going along that
恋愛
line?
映画でも見る？それとも秀吉おじさんに習う？
まるで鬼の首でも取ったみたいだな。こういう話では男は女の子にかなわないね。
Normally, when George and Jessica got together, their parents would say George is diligent and admirable, and Jessica is lazy and rude. So it's probably unbearable fun for Jessica to have their roles finally reversed. George realized this as well, so he resigned himself to being the one getting teased for once.
ジョージ兄さんさえいいならさ、シャノンでちょっと練習してみたら？
Called it. Probably everyone called it, but still, I'll have pride in what I can get.
シャノンを一日退屈させずにデートに連れてくんだよ。ど
Oh.
うよ。そんなお嬢様。
When she heard Jessica's audacious plan, Shannon's face turned bright red with poof, and a donut of smoke started to rise from her head.
それはとても魅力的な提案だけど、シャノンちゃんに悪いよ。彼女の貴重な休日を奪うだけじゃない。彼女が本当に思いを寄せる人と二人きりで過ごす聖域に僕が割り込んでしまうことになる。そんな無粋なことはできないね。
私もその思い人とかそういう人はいませんので、そういうお気遣いは無用なのです。
Shannon's blood had all rushed to her head, and it looked like she didn't even know what she was babbling about. Jessica, who knew how Shannon normally was, seemed to be finding this hilarious. She couldn't hide her cackling laughter anymore.
そうなのかい？シャノンちゃんみたいな可愛い子が独り身なんて信じられないね。
私使用人ですから、その男の方との縁なんてありませんし、その。
Oh, I mean, it isn't a matter of course that you don't have any relationships because you're a servant. Maybe because it's on an isolated island, but there's shifts for which servants are on the island and all. So, yeah.
ってことは、シャノンも将来素敵な男性を射止めるために交際の練習が必要だってことじゃないのかよ。
Jessica?
つまり二人とも互いの思惑は一致するわけだ。なるほど、こりゃいいぜ。
Jessica irresponsibly cheered the two of them on. By now, even George was hanging his head and turning red.
ジョージ、さっきから呼んでるわよ。聞こえないの？
Whenever it appeared in what was already an embarrassing situation, both of them got even more flustered. Jessica watched and laughed loudly.
母さん、ごめんよ、話が込み入っちゃっててね。気づかなかった。
これはエヴァ様、大変失礼しました。
若い子たち同士で大層盛り上がってたみたいね。あなたたちもみんなお年頃だもの。そういう話題が尽きないのもよくわかるわ。
嫌ですね。エヴァおばさんだってまだまだお若いじゃないですか。秀吉おじさんとの馴れ初めを聞かせてくださいよ。
あら、そんなの言えるわけないわよ。本当にみんな若いんだから。
それで何、母さん。用があって声をかけたんじゃないの？
お父さんたちの話が終わったわ。おじいさまにあなたの話をするからいらっしゃい。
僕の話？何の話かな？
今みんなでしてたのと同じ話よ。
Oh?
ほら、例の話。
Watch them have their wires crossed and talk about different things.
あの話かい。別におじいさまに話すようなことじゃないんじゃないかな。
何の話だよ。まさかジョージ兄さん、誰かと結婚するの？それはおめでとうございます。
違うよ。特定の女性はいないってさっき言ったじゃないか。
威張ることじゃないでしょ。まったく。
Eva smiled bitterly, looking a little exasperated.
わかった。ジョージ兄さん、あれでしょ。お見合いだ。お見合いですか。
まあね。
Surely, as a man, George wanted to find a partner by himself and bring her home with him. So it seemed he'd thought it a bit pathetic to meet his partner for the first time in a marriage meeting arranged by his parents.
お見合いというのはもっと年齢が成熟してからするものじゃないのかな。
True, because this is years before the events of the previous game, right? Or at the very least a year before, I think.
僕はまだ一人前になったって自覚すらないというのに。
So yeah, previous episode he was 18, so definitely younger than 18 at the moment.
もちろん、即結納即結婚なんて焦る気は全然ないのよ。親睦を深めて、年齢的にもう少し落ち着いてから籍を入れる形でも問題ないの。
Judging by Eva's forceful attitude and George's non-committal one, the others could catch a glimpse of the story behind this marriage meeting. They didn't know who George was supposed to be meeting, but it was surely someone who would profit Eva's family in a business sense. The very fact that they'd be satisfied with mere engagement to deepen the relationship between the two families, rather than an immediate marriage, made it almost feel like a political maneuver.
結婚はね、好きになってからするものじゃないの。してから慣れることよ。感情だけで結婚すると必ず後悔する。身元のしっかりした人を生涯の伴侶に選んで、それから愛情を築いていくのも決して間違ったことではないの。
I think George disagrees with that.
エヴァおばさん、それじゃ秀吉おじさんに悪いですよ。
Well said.
私はあの人のこと大好きよ。いつまでも一緒にいて人生を共にしていきたい。
エヴァ様、素晴らしいです。本当にご立派です。
ありがとう。でもその気持ちは二人で夫婦をしていくうちに育んだものよ。そして今の私たちより未来の私たちの方がもっともっと仲良しだと信じてる。私は夫婦はそういうものがいいと思ってるの。
Just because you've got one successful data point doesn't mean that all data points will be successful.
だからって好きでもない相手と結婚してもいいって論法にはならないと思うけどな。
だからって好きな相手なら誰と結婚してもいいという論法にはならないわ。結婚は一瞬。でもその後の夫婦生活はずっとずっと長いの。だから一時の感情に任せず慎重に相手を探すべきなの。そしてそれは人生経験の未熟なあなたよりお母さんたちの方がうまくやれるとは思わない？
On the other hand, it is his life to make his mistakes and learn. Certainly you can advise him, but deciding all of his major life decisions for him?
それはそうかもしれないけど。
あなたは私の自慢の一人息子よ。どこへ出しても恥ずかしくないくらい立派に成長してくれたわ。バトラ君は籍を抜け、あなたが今やお父様の血を引く唯一の男孫。
I wasn't aware that he fully left the family register. Huh.
あなたにふさわしい相手は慎重に選ばなくてはならない。
As everyone related to the Ustromia family knew, Eva adored George immensely. And that didn't mean that she had pampered him. She had been strict with him, and had raised him into a wonderful boy who wouldn't betray her expectations. That's why she treasured him so.
あなたの相手は決して母さんたちの損得で決めてなんかいないわ。あなたにふさわしい本当に素晴らしい女性に母さんが合わせてあげる。今はあなたの中にある青臭い若さがそれを疎むかもしれない。でもこれだけは母さんの言うことを聞きなさい。私があなたのためを思わなかったことが一度でもある？
それはないけど。
今はそれで結構よ。さあ行きましょう。お父様を待たせてるわよ。急いで屋敷に行きなさい。
じゃあごめんね二人とも。また後で。
George bowed to the two of them, And after bowing once more to Shannon, he dashed off to the mansion.
じゃあおばさんも行くわね。楽しい話を打ち切っちゃってごめんね、ジェシカちゃん。シャノンちゃん。
いえ気にしないでください。じゃあシャノン、私たちは行こうぜ。はい。
大丈夫よ。ジェシカちゃんだってきっとそのうち素敵な出会いがあるわよ。ジェシカちゃんにふさわしい素敵な方がね。
私と同程度ってことは成績の悪い男かな。なんだかうぜえぜ。
もちろんシャノンちゃんにもね。あなたにふさわしい素敵な男性がきっと現れるわよ。
はい、ありがとうございます。
As Eva giggled and smiled, she approached Shannon's ear with a hand over her mouth, as though she were trying to tell her a secret. Don't. It's going to be something like, "Don't approach George."
使用人風情のあなたにぴったりの相手がきっと見つかるわよ。義務教育に行かせてもらった恩も忘れて身の程を知りなさい。
そんなつもりは。私。
ジョージはお父様の血を引く孫の中では嫡男に当たるのよ。ひょっとしたら未来の後ろ宮家を背負うことになるかもしれない人。その期待に応えるためにたくさんの勉強を重ねて素晴らしい大学に入り素晴らしい成績を残しているわ。そんなジョージと無能無資格無教養な使用人風情が釣り合うと本気でお思い？
That's definitely going too far. Those malicious words all poured into Shannon's ear without spilling a drop. To Shannon, it was like cold water being poured in there.
私はそんなつもりは。
This was all whispered to Shannon in secret, and with the same smile as before. Jessica, who could only see Eva's expression, didn't think it was anything other than Eva telling Shannon some embarrassing story about love. When the secret conversation ended, Eva patted Shannon's shoulders, as though she was urging her on.
大丈夫よ。あなたにぴったりのお相手がきっと見つかるからね。じゃあね、ジェシカちゃん。また後でね。
はい、また後で。秀吉おじさんとの話、その時聞かせてくださいね。
いやよ。
Eva laughed loudly and headed back to the entrance hall. Behind Jessica, who was cheerfully waving her hand, Shannon reflected very, very deeply on those words of Eva's about knowing her place. Is this Shannon, I'm guessing, again? It's time for me to take a serious look at how full of myself I've been acting. I forgot. I'm furniture. Furniture isn't human. So, I am a being who must feel gratitude for even being treated like a human. And I am not permitted to wish for anything more. People sometimes develop affection for furniture they're used to using. That is an emotion on the human side, and the furniture has no right to hope for such a thing. I just feel so ostentatious, or pretentious rather. It's enough that furniture serves with simple honesty day after day. And that feeling I got when talking to George-sama and Jessica-sama is the same as a forbidden drug to me. In other words, maybe an emotion I must never experience.
シャノン、先ほどからぼんやりが過ぎます。体調でも悪いのですか？
Okay, I wasn't sure if Head in the Clouds like happy Head in the Clouds kind of thing or storm clouds.
いえ、失礼いたしました。
Natsui's words were right on the mark. Even Shannon couldn't believe that she hadn't noticed Natsui until she'd called. Normally, it was essential that she focus on her cleaning at this time of day. But she'd spent all her time sighing and hardly making any progress.
たとえお客様がおられなくても、常に気を張っていなくてはなりません。そんな様では、後ろ宮家に仕える使用人として情けありませんよ。
はい。以後注意します。
もうじき、当主様と主人がお帰りになられます。書斎の清掃は済んでいますか？階段の清掃は済んでいますか？
Ooh. I wonder if this is before the new study has been completed, or at least for the door to the new study.
申し訳ございません。まだです。
ええ、知っています。ですから、ルノンにやらせておきました。
That's a new name.
あなたがもたもたと廊下を清掃している時間で、彼女は書斎と階段の清掃を済ませてしまいましたよ。
それは、丁寧にお掃除をしていたから、時間がかかってしまって。
Shannon was simple and honest, so she would always carry out her tasks seriously and properly, without any omissions. So, she was always slow with her work. In contrast, Yunon cleverly avoided doing extra work whenever it was possible. So, she could complete her jobs with a result that looked almost the same to an outsider, but in a much shorter time. In other words, she was a shrewd employee. Compared to that, it's probably fair to say that Shannon wasn't very shrewd at all, talking back to Natsui when Natsui was in a bad mood. Of course, there was nothing that Natsui couldn't stand more than a servant talking back. Her forehead creased and she spoke sternly. And yet, her slow, admonishing style of speech was even more terrifying, and finally made Shannon realize she had said the wrong thing.
ならば、存分に丁寧な清掃を心がけなさい。シャノン、あなたにこのまま大広間の清掃も命じます。当主様の大切な絵画が多数飾られ、後宮家への賓客をお招きすることもある大切な広間です。埃一つ残さないよう、あなたが納得するまで丁寧に清掃なさい。もちろん今日中にです。それを終えて私に報告するまで、食事も休憩も許しません。わかりましたね。
はい。
結構。使用人はその言葉だけを口にするように。次の口答えには、より厳しい罰を与えますから、そのつもりで。
Poor Shannon.
よく胸に刻んでおきなさい。
はい、奥様。ご指導をありがとうございます。
どういたしまして。
Behaving as though her headache was troubling her, Natsui headed off down the corridor. When she couldn't see her anymore, Shannon hung her head and sighed. This was what happened when she had her head in the clouds. Even though I'm bad at everything I do, I should be able to at least carry out cleaning as well as an average person can, right? It's because I can't even perform that very well that I'm crying so pathetically. But what's even more shameful is that not only have I been unable to perform a single bit of cleaning well, but just now, when Natsui was scolding me, I imagined that person appearing and rescuing me. If only George-sama was here. Would he casually step in and save me? Surely he'd show up cheerfully, intentionally acting like he didn't know what was going on, nimbly change the subject, make me forget I'd ever been rebuked by Natsui. I kept envisioning him, suddenly appearing from the other side of the door, or the other end of the hallway. I envisioned the kind of person that would be an appropriate partner for him in a marriage meeting. And I envisioned how unfitting I was for him. Ever clearly told me. It's been repeating over and over in my dreams.
姉さんは相変わらず不器用だね。奥様は今朝から虫の居所が悪い。黙ってうなずいていればいいものを余計なことを言うから。
カノン君。
Cannon was suddenly there. His footsteps were always quieter than the cat's, and he never left any trace of his presence. He probably could have stood there forever, and she still wouldn't have noticed him. The expression on Cannon's face was one of hatred towards Natsui, I'm guessing? He made that expression for Shannon, who didn't know how to do it herself.
奥様も、そしてルノンも地獄へ落ちろ。あいつは奥様がどこをチェックするか知ってて、そこしか掃除しない。さっきの掃除もそうだった。見ていたから知ってる。本当の意味での掃除なんかしてないんだよ。丁寧に掃除する姉さんに寄生してるだけの最低なやつだ。
そんな汚い言葉を使ってはダメよ。汚い言葉はカノン君の綺麗な魂まで怪我してしまう。だからせめて私の前ではそんな言葉遣いをしないで。
Shannon's too good.
ね。
Cannon turned away as though sulking. It was a reaction that hid his true feelings, which was very like Cannon, but I was a little happy. He was getting mad for my sake.
大広間の掃除は大変だよ。僕も手伝う。
ありがとう。でも奥様に命じられたのは私だから大丈夫。カノン君にも自分のお仕事があるんでしょ。
汚らわしい仕事だよ。僕の魂なんてとっくに汚れてる。
I don't know, when you consider how young he is, that just feels edgy. Cannon then hung his head and bit his lower lip.
手伝ってくれるという言葉だけで私は十分。カノン君も自分の仕事に戻らないとあなたまで罰を受けることになっちゃう。そしたら私は悲しい。
Shannon knew Cannon's character well. Sometimes he didn't think enough about himself. If I don't refuse forcefully, will help me even if it means neglecting his own job. Cannon was a little sad that his goodwill had been rejected, but he realized that what he was doing would only hurt her more in the end, so he gave a single small sigh.
わかったよ。姉さんも頑張って。
Yeah, and if Natsui catches wind of it, she might think that Shannon wasn't punished properly, and so give her another punishment as well.
それに私にも責任はあるから。
姉さんには責任なんて何もないよ。
あるの。だからもう言って。
Cannon's face showed that he still hadn't completely accepted it. Without being any more obstinate, he disappeared. Even though Cannon-kun came to give me words of comfort when I was down, even so, I was dejected again because it wasn't him. Oh, that in itself was a sin. Went far beyond any dream the likes of me could be permitted to see. I don't know my place. Shannon, who had neglected breakfast, already felt her concentration begin to waver. But if she didn't finish up cleaning the reception hall, she wouldn't receive Natsui's permission to eat. That cruel Natsui had surely told the kitchen something to that effect. I have to respectfully receive Madam's punishment. That's right. My position in the world is furniture, and I've been intoxicated by a dream that's beyond me. And I think on that note, I will be ending it there for today. I hope you all enjoyed. Let me know any feedback you have in the comments, and until next time, we'll continue episode 2. Until then, see ya.